Okay, so we're in ordinary time, and that's obviously, as we talked about before, that's the time between all the holiday rush and everything. And we're in this series just kind of thinking about things that are part of just living our lives in ordinary time. And we talked about the practice of gratitude and the idea of releasing the past and the future. We talked about the idea of vocation, that each person has a call. It's not just pastors. The idea of rhythms was last week. Those patterns that we establish, and of course, what happens when you establish a pattern? It gets disrupted. So now we're going to talk, try and think a little bit through disruptions today. Right. So think about books or movies that you like. Stories that you like to hear. If you think about the stories you like to hear, the books you like to read, the movies you like to watch, it is the disruptions that are interesting, not the habits. Watching somebody go to work every day, sit at their desk, do their job, and go home is not an interesting movie. Having them ride up the elevator, get off the elevator, and open the door to their office and find that everything is missing. Now that's a movie, right? It's like, what's going on? It's the disruptions that make things interesting. And so the first thing I think that it's important to do is kind of just reframe the way we think about disruptions in our life. It's disruptions that make the story interesting for us. This guy, let's see if he pops up here. Come on. Oh, hey. Oh, seriously. I'm having a disruption right now. How about it? Yeah. There we go. Okay. Does anyone recognize that guy? Anybody?
He's a skater.
Okay, 1 point for Doug. Does anyone want to go for 2? That's Scott Hamilton. As a young man. He no longer looks like that. He's a bald guy in a suit now. He was the U.S. National Championship skater for 4 years running, 1980 to 1984. The world champion skater for 4 straight years, 81 through 84, and then he won the Olympic gold medal in 1984, and then he retired. But he was trying to perfect this particular move. It's a triple something or other. I was listening to an interview with him, and I'm not going to pretend I know anything about skating at all, so I'm going to call it a triple something or other. And he kept falling on his hip. And he ended up, he's trying it so often, he ends up swollen from his knee to above his hip. His whole side is swollen up. And he has to have surgery to fix it. And after the surgery, he can't do the thing the same way. And so he has to do the landing a different way, and guess what? It worked. And he could do the triple whatever that it was. So he had this disruption, and it worked out okay in the end. But depending on whether or not you stare at that thing and you say, well, I'm done, or you stare at that thing and say, I guess I need to deal with this. It's what you do with the disruptions. There's another, this is a fairly disruptive document right here. I don't know if you can see that. It says the Unanimous Declaration of the United States of America, July 4th, 1776. That was a big disruption. So one of the things we celebrate, even in our own country, every year, we light up fireworks in celebration of disruption. And so disruption is not necessarily a bad thing for us to think about. It's not a bad thing to encounter in our lives. I found a book filled with disruptions. Just page after page of disruptions. You might recognize it. The Bible is a book of disruptions. Creation itself is a disruption. In the beginning, everything was like smooth and right. The Spirit was hovering over the face of the waters, and then all of a sudden, what happened? Everything was like smooth and peaceful, and then God disrupted it, didn't He? He spoke, and He said, "Let there be light," and then, bam! Everything was disrupted, and then He kept speaking and speaking and speaking, and our very creation is a disruption. And then you go through the Bible. The Bible is actually a story of disruption after disruption after disruption. Noah, huge disruption. Abraham, he's an old man. He's settled. And then God says, listen, I want you to get up and go. And I'll just tell you when to stop. That doesn't sound very attractive to me. But that's what God said to Abraham, and Abraham had the faith to trust that disruption in his life, and he went. And on and on. Jacob, Moses, they all lived through disruptions. David, Mary, and Joseph. Imagine the disruption of Mary. Mary is a quiet, humble servant of God. And then an angel appears to her and says, you're going to have a son. And your son is actually going to be God on earth. I know you're not married, but don't worry about it, Mary. That's pretty disruptive. And then Joseph is, Joseph is trying to figure out how to deal with this disruption. And so and I think this is an example for us, he wants to be a righteous man, but he also wants to be a kind man. And Mary's got this story. She's obviously losing her mind because she said God made her pregnant. And so what do you do with someone who's losing their mind? You don't want to, marry them, but you don't want to publicly shame them as a harlot either. Harlot, how's that for a new word? Old word. Gee, he doesn't read too many old books. And so he resolves to divorce her quietly, to be righteous and yet compassionate. And then the angel appears to him and disrupts his life, and on it goes, right? Disruption after disruption after disruption. And I'm telling you, there is nobody who is more disruptive than Jesus. Think about the life of Jesus. Think about the people Jesus encountered. Jesus walked around disrupting people's lives. I mean, that was like what he did. When we think we don't want a life with disruptions, when we just want to have order, when we want to have peace, when we just want to have uninterrupted rhythms and predictability, we would not want Jesus to come to our house. Because Jesus comes in and disrupts things. Think about all the people whose lives he disrupted. One person, a rich young man, Jesus said, well, what you really need to do is sell everything and follow me. Another guy who wanted to come with Jesus, he said, no, you need to go back to your hometown and tell them what God has done for you, the demoniac. He would tell people, your sins are forgiven. He said to a man who'd spent on his mat for decades, pick up your mat and walk. That changes your life. He told a dead girl, I say to you, rise up. That was the rhythm of life is you're born, you get sick, and you die. And Jesus walks into that rhythm too and disrupts it and says, get up. Jesus is the disruptor. He wants to disrupt us too. We all need his disruption. So, if we look through the Bible, we see disruptions come in all forms, in all shapes, in all sizes. Sometimes they're giant, and sometimes they're little. Whoops. I don't want to use that. So disruptions can come from the outside. Many of us have had disruptions come from the outside. Evidently, God has a sense of humor, because I'm preaching on disruptions today. Yesterday was a very smooth day. Everything was all lined up, ready to go, locked down, ready to get to church with a full night's sleep. And then I had something happen that kept me up till 3 o'clock in the morning. So God said, you know what, you just need a little disruption since you're going to preach on disruptions. Maybe that's what happened. I don't know. So disruptions, and most of us have had disruptions come at us from outside. Disruptions can also come to us from the inside. Somebody will say something and it will stick with us. Or an idea will stick with us. And the idea begins to change the way we think. Maybe it changes the way we think about relationships. Maybe it changes the way we think about our job. Maybe it changes whether or not we're satisfied doing what we're doing. Maybe it changes the whole way we look at the Bible. Sometimes the biggest disruptions are the ones that happen in our own spirits. And God is getting at us. And of course, sometimes they're huge. A diagnosis of a major illness is a huge disruption. Sometimes they're tiny, someone poking their head in our office to talk to us. So just think of all the different ways when you think things are humming along and then something comes along to change the course that you think they set. That's a disruption. And that's what God did in history through Jesus, and that's what Jesus continues to do in us. Now, the first thing, just we need to acknowledge a human fact, is that all disruptions are stressful. Everything that changes your charted course, everything that changes what you expect to happen this day, this month, this year, is going to be stressful. And it's not just the bad stuff. It's the good stuff, too. It all causes stress. And it could be something really hard to overcome, like only getting 4 hours sleep. Or it could be something really good, like, or at least that seems good. Ask anybody who wins a lotto whether or not that adds stress to their lives. You know, how many of you wish you would win, and yet you read about what happens when people win, and it's like, here's what I read about. This is one of the standard things that kind of happens is you end up not fitting anywhere. Because you have all this money, and so you could do all these things that your friends don't want to do, or can't afford to do, and so you kind of lose those friends, because, you know, they don't want to hear about 4 cruises a year sooner or later. That kind of thing. And so you end up with a little bit of distance from them. But I read about some other lottery winners who moved into like their dream neighborhood with the big house and everything else, and they were completely shunned in the neighborhood because they had not earned their money. So they ended up completely isolated. Now that turns out to be a bad thing, but even the very good things, disruptions are stressful. So when they come, when disruptions come, whether or not it's the thought in your head, or the person walking in your front door, or a giant thing that happens in your life, it seems to me there's 3 things that you can do with a disruption. You can ignore it. You can decide that that is not something that you are going to just deal with. I'm thinking like of the rich young man, where he walked up to Jesus and he said, "Teacher, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Well, you know the commandments, right? Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't murder." And he's like, "Cool, I've done all that." And Jesus said, "Well, you do need to do one more thing. You need to sell everything and follow me." Bam. Possible disruption. This could be a defining moment for him, and what does he do? He walks away. He just chooses to ignore the disruption altogether. So that's one thing you can do. When people disrupt your lives, if it's a little one, you can choose to ignore the disruption. You walk into your office, you can give them like 20% of your attention while you're working, instead of giving them your full attention or whatever. You can just kind of shields up on it. Another thing you can do when the disruption comes is simply say, "I am right. I know what should be happening, and I am going to make sure you do not do this." This is what the religious leaders did. Jesus came in with very solid, valid teaching backed up by miracles, signs. The very signs they were looking for were the things that Jesus did. He told them it's the scriptures that testify about me. And yet, the Pharisees, we don't want to get into detail. The religious leaders, their idea of how to deal with this disruption to their programmatic, planned out, stable lives was to crush it. To crush it. And they crushed Jesus. And that didn't actually work, but that's what they did. That's how they chose to handle the disruption. They reacted against it. And of course, there's some disruptions we can react against as good things. I'm thinking of Joseph when he's going along, he's managing Potiphar. You remember the story of Joseph? He was the guy who was sold into slavery and then ended up being prime minister of Egypt. Along the way, he ended up running the house of an Egyptian general named Potiphar. And everything was humming along, was all clicking along. Potiphar felt like he didn't have to worry about his house at all because Joseph was so trustworthy. And then in comes Potiphar's wife and tries to sleep with Joseph because he's a good-looking dude. And his reaction is to run away from that, get out of that situation. And it was, in that instance, he had to react against it in a positive way because if you didn't want to embrace that because that was unrighteous, right? So, and then the third thing is to embrace the disruption, and that's what we see in the disciples. Jesus comes along, and he says, follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. And that's like a disruptive moment. What are they going to do? Are they going to ignore Jesus? Plenty of people ignored Jesus. Are they going to react against Jesus? Plenty of people reacted and continue to react against Jesus. Or are they going to embrace the call of Jesus to follow him, to receive the forgiveness that he gives, and then to begin to participate in bringing that love and redemption into the rest of the world? So, this is how I see disruptions. And when I was reading through the Bible, and I was looking at all the stuff we have, and our core values, I think, are just practical. I think they're practical. I think they're serviceable. I think they are clear. I think they are general enough to apply to any situation. And I think I said this before, but when we first got married, Kelly used to write on. She used to like to decorate envelopes when she would send them cards and stuff. She always write kind of like "Love is the answer" along the edge of the envelope or something. And in fact, when I was studying Greek and Hebrew and I was just all that, I always thought it was kind of simple and trite. It's not that simple, but the older I get, the more I think she's probably right. Love is the answer. And so we have these core values. And I just want to think about, we can't cover every single disruption of our lives that's going to happen. There's no way to formulate a bullet list or a flow chart. But these values can guide you through whatever disruption you encounter from whatever source. So the first value is faith. When something comes that disrupts the flow of your life, the pattern of your life, the rhythm of your life, one thing you want to look at and one thing you want to help govern your reaction is faith. Are you going to react? Are you going to respond to this disruption out of fear and control, or out of faith? Are you going to try and be God of your own life and do everything yourself and make sure everything turns out exactly how you want? Or are you going to trust that God is doing what he said he would do, which is cause all things to work together for good? So that's one. I think hope. When a disruption happens, the question is, and this is especially for the difficult disruptions, despair can set in, hopelessness can set in. And if we're going to receive the gift that Jesus wants to give us, one of the things he gives us is the ability to decide, to choose to be hopeful in the middle of whatever disruption comes our way. So what's disrupting you? Can you choose that hopeful attitude? And finally, and the biggest one, the greatest of these, is love. Are you going to, whatever you choose to do with the disruption, what's it going to be guided by? What's your decision going to be guided by? Is it going to be guided by something like fear or anger or resentment or bitterness or self-protection? Or is it going to be guided by love? And when I was thinking of this one, what I was thinking of actually was the tiniest little disruptions in our lives. The phone rings, someone interrupts you reading, you're at your desk working and someone pokes their head into your office, your cubicle, or someone stops to talk to you when you're walking. Just the tiniest little disruptions in what you're doing, or in the drive-through when you got to talk to the person. And the thing that I thought of, and this might just be me and where I'm at right now, what I'm thinking about, is the idea of presenting my wholehearted self to whatever person I'm talking to. That's kind of where I'm at right now in terms of learning to handle disruptions with love. Is when I feel interrupted by something, whether or not it's somebody interrupting a podcast I'm listening to, or somebody calling me when I'm trying to concentrate or whatever. they're in front of me, then I should be wholeheartedly with them. There's several phrases, and I think I have one in here, actually. Yes. Here's the story of Zacchaeus. You guys remember Jesus was walking, he had a huge crowd, and Zacchaeus climbed up a tree, because Zacchaeus was a wee little man. For those of you who know the song. Zacchaeus was a short little guy, tax collector, and he wanted to see Jesus. And he climbed up in a tree, and Jesus was walking along, and he looked up at Zacchaeus. He turned his attention towards Zacchaeus and said, I want you to come down because I want to stay at your house today. And several other times in the Gospels, we find Jesus walking around, and then we find later, like Peter walking around, and it says this phrase. It says, he looked at him. He looked at him. Now, normally, if you say someone responded to the lame man, or someone responded to Nicodemus the Pharisee, or someone responded to the beggar, you don't have to say he looked at them, right? So what does that mean? Why did the writer include he turned and looked at them? And I think it's because that person, they're always like calling out, right? I mean, the people, Peter or Jesus or whatever, they're walking along, and the lame person or whatever is crying out. It's a disruption. And Jesus or Peter, whoever, chooses to embrace that disruption in love. And he turns, and it says he looks at him. And I think what that's saying is that he doesn't give him 30% of his attention or okay, what do you need? There's none of that. The impression you get with Jesus, because it always says he looked at him, is that Jesus is talking to the person he's talking to. He is conversing with the person he's with. His mind and his spirit are right there. They're not somewhere else in space. They're not somewhere else in time. They're right there. And I think that's part of the love reaction to disruptions when they happen. This also means in our day and age that we have to turn off our communications devices. Because people can interrupt us anytime they want. If we leave our cell phone on. Jesus, this is one of the most comforting passages in the Bible. It says Jesus turned off his cell phone and didn't talk to him. No, wait. Shoot. That's just my paraphrase. It says Jesus got up early and snuck away without telling anybody. Isn't that wonderful? We think of Jesus as always available, and he was. And the reason we think of him that way is because whenever he was with a crowd, he was talking with somebody, he would look right at them. He was fully available when he was available, but he knew he needed time of unavailability, and there was nobody with him to write about that. And so all we know is that Jesus got up and snuck away without anyone telling anybody, and then his disciples went to go try and find him. It's okay to sneak off and not tell anybody. It's okay to turn your cell phone off, quit checking your email, all that stuff. And it's even more important, the more accessible we end up with each other, is to manage our availability to disrupt. And by doing that, you're going to be able to be more fully present for people when those disruptions come. So, handling the disruptions of our lives. Handling the disruptions of our lives God's way. Looking at them and saying, what's the way to handle this disruption that is faithful, hopeful, and loving, and on mission. Are you guys all familiar with Star Wars? Everybody knows Star Wars, main characters, right? Luke, Leia, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda. I can use a Star Wars illustration and I don't have to tell the story, right? Okay. So here's my question for you, because I think I know the answer, and strangely enough, I think I just figured it out yesterday. Where is Jesus in Star Wars? I'm not gonna put you on the spot because I don't want to say. What?
Is he the forest?
I don't think so. Here's where I think Jesus is. I think Jesus is Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think Jesus is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Because here's what happens with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Luke is just going along, and then what happens? His life is disrupted. And Obi-Wan Kenobi comes alongside of him to teach him And then Obi-Wan Kenobi dies so that Luke can live. And Luke is the hero. And it turns out that Obi-Wan Kenobi is kind of still with Luke anyways, right? Because lots of people are like, oh, it's got to be Luke. He's the hero, right? No, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. And here's the reason this is an important illustration is the last word mission. I can stand. The last word mission, the perspective of understanding that Jesus is not Luke, he's Obi-Wan Kenobi, is because you are Luke. You have a mission. You're the one with the job to do. You're the one who has to stay on, figure out what to do with those disruptions. Luke has a bunch of disruptions, and he has to figure out what to do in each disruption as his life goes on. Because Obi-Wan is setting up Luke to be the hero. Jesus is setting up, I think maybe Jesus is setting up you to be a hero. He's setting up you to be a hero. He said, let me think. He said, you will do even greater things than this. So you are Luke Skywalker. You are the hero in your life. And Jesus is the one who has come alongside you in the scriptures. He has died for you so that you might live. And then you die to yourself and you live for the story that you have been swept into. Jesus said, unless you die to yourself, you'll never find life. Luke had to die to his old self and throw himself into the thing he was swept up into. And that's what we have to do. You and I are Luke Skywalker. Jesus is Obi-Wan Kenobi. And we have to die to ourselves and be swept up into this narrative where, in fact, you are Luke. You are the hero in your narrative. But it's a heroism enabled by Jesus. And are you on mission? And the way to be on mission is when disruptions happen, to handle them with faith and hope and love. And those are my thoughts for you today, and I would like to pray with you. Father in heaven, we are here, and we have been thinking about when disruptions happen. And we have been thinking about the Bible, your word, and seeing that it is in fact a book filled with disruptions. We have seen and thought about the life of Jesus and seen how he basically disrupted everybody he came in contact with. We have seen that disruptions are where interesting things happen, from Olympic champions being made to countries being born. And so, Father, first help us to realize that disruptions are going to happen. And help us face into the disruptions that come into our lives. Help us to decide whether or not the better thing is to ignore it, to react against it, or to embrace it and go with it. And as we deal with these disruptions, Father, help us handle them with faith and hope and love so that we can stay on mission. The mission that you gave us, that Jesus said, as the Father sends him, so now he sends us. Keep us on mission. Help us handle those disruptions well, so that that's the turning point, that we embrace it, and if it's a distraction from the mission, we let it go. In Jesus' name. All right, so I got 3 questions for you. They're in your bulletin too. What was the last disruption you experienced, and how did you respond? Number 2, think about or share a disruption you have experienced or heard about that has impacted you in some way. And you can even use Scott Hamill if you want, but it'd be better if you came up with another one, since I just gave you that one. And number 3, and this is the question that we all need to think about. If we're going to be kingdom sharers, if we're going to be kingdom expanders, we need to think about how Jesus has disrupted our lives. How has Jesus disrupted your life? So take some time to think about that, and bring your offerings forward. We'll celebrate the Lord's Supper in 5 minutes.